Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video I will be giving my thoughts on the 2019 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses, which took place on October 5th 2019. Now there is a lot to get through, in fact so much material. I'm going to be splitting my rebuttal into two parts, but let's get part one underway. Without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Excitement was in the air as brothers and sisters from around the world poured into the Assembly Hall in Newburgh, New York, for the annual meeting on October 5, 2019. Encouraging reports and thrilling announcements gave clear evidence of Jehovah's blessing on the preaching work.
So what we've just seen is Isaac Murray, who is a helper to the governing body, introducing the annual meeting on JW Broadcasting. Right out of the gate, we're getting some extraordinary claims here. Apparently encouraging reports and upbuilding talks are going to give evidence that Jehovah is blessing the work of Jehovah's Witnesses, and indeed that is a claim that gets made repeatedly throughout the annual meeting. Spoiler alert, Watchtower genuinely believes that new building projects in particular are a sign of Jehovah's blessing on the organization.
I've chosen the theme, your leader is one, the Christ, based on Matthew 23, verse 10. Starting out with Nimrod of Babylon, the world has seen many leaders, religious leaders, political leaders. When Hitler ruled Nazi Germany, the Nazis created a slogan, one people, one empire, one leader. Well, what happened to that leader? After causing the death of millions during World War II, he reportedly ended his life by suicide.
So Gerrit Loesch has been chosen to host the 2019 annual meeting. I must just say that considering I'd heard reports that he is suffering to some extent with dementia, I actually think he does a remarkable job of injecting a little bit of humour and energy into the annual meeting. So whether it's just a change of medication or whether the reports were exaggerated, who knows, but he certainly doesn't seem to be in any way impaired when he is giving his talks and introducing other people's talks. That said, we need to talk about his own presentation, in which he is talking about leaders. The whole point of this talk, as far as I can tell, is to convince Jehovah's Witnesses that the governing body are not leaders in the way that most people think of leaders. In fact, the organization is led by Jehovah and Jesus. The governing body are really just there to provide guidance and interpret Jehovah's will. Obviously, all of this is word games, and we're going to see Gerrit Loesch employ word games as his talk unfolds. I just find irony in the fact that he is opening by talking about Hitler and the fact that Hitler was a renowned leader and yet he committed suicide. I'm not entirely sure of the relevance of talking about that in the context of what he's going to be describing or talking about. But there is irony in the fact that Gerrit Loesch's father fought for Hitler. In fact, he died fighting for Germany in Russia in 1943, and he died having no idea that his son would go on to become a cult leader with control and influence over millions. Clearly, Gerrit Loesch doesn't have anywhere near the notoriety and evil of Adolf Hitler. Nevertheless, there's a strange irony there.
Human leaders have failed. Why? For one, most did not have enough love for God and for the people. They used their position to acquire wealth, fame, power. Others might have had noble intentions, but still failed. Why? Imperfect man does not have the ability to rule or lead others perfectly.
I just want to focus on one thing that Gerrit Loesch said there. He said that human leaders have used their position to gain wealth, fame, and power. One thing that you will often hear Jehovah's Witnesses say, I've said it myself, when defending the organisation against any kind of criticism, not necessarily from apostates, but you will often call on ordinary people who will say, well, what about your leaders? Don't your leaders have too much power? Should you really be just following a bunch of human leaders? And you would defend the governing body by saying, well, actually, these men don't take a salary for what they're doing. They don't live in luxury. They live with their fellow workers and eat with them. And they're just ordinary worshippers. That is, the more you find out about Jehovah's Witnesses, the more you realise that that is not how it works. Undoubtedly, the governing body lives a luxurious lifestyle. Yes, they may have to eat their breakfast every morning with other Bethelites, but you can bet that they'll have some of the nicest Bethel accommodation, because how it works at Bethel is that the more senior you are, the more years you have accumulated in full-time service, the more perks you'll get. So they will have very nice Bethel accommodation. There's good reason to believe that when they travel, they fly business class or first class. And wherever they go, they are greeted with adoration by their followers. Really, you could argue that irrespective of whether they have private accounts in the Cayman Islands or a fleet of yachts or whatever, and we can't really prove that they don't have those things, but even if you put that all to one side and disregard the issue of wealth acquisition, which you could suggest many cult leaders would be interested in, one thing that the governing body unquestionably has is power and influence. And fame, which is another word that he used. Fame is another thing that leaders apparently crave. These men have so much fame, so much power, and so much influence over millions of worshippers. That alone is a motive for them to put their own positions ahead of the needs of their followers.
In the first century, at Pentecost 33 CE, the Christian congregation was formed, but there was a governing body of mature Christians, namely the apostles, who were responsible to take the lead. When some of them were killed or died of sickness or old age, other anointed ones were appointed to serve on that body. Similarly, today, there's no specific number on the modern-day governing body.
Okay, two things. First of all, as I'm sure many of you will know, there was no governing body. The words governing body or the phrase governing body doesn't appear anywhere in the Bible. If God wanted his people to identify with the phrase governing body, he could very easily have put some kind of word in the Bible in Greek conveying that idea. God did no such thing. What Watchtower does is it says, well, you originally had the apostles, and then the apostles were expanded to include the older men, and then these two groups fused together, and then what you had from that point forwards was a governing body with centralized control over all of the congregations of Christianity. That is, quite frankly, rewriting the Bible. If you read the New Testament on its own terms, it describes the apostles It describes the older men, which means elders. It also describes other congregations, most notably Antioch, which seemed to be almost a competing power, you could say, in terms of Christianity in the Mediterranean. And you actually see Antioch making decisions all by itself. You even have the word Christians appearing first in Antioch, even though the governing body is supposed to be based in Jerusalem. So the whole narrative that Gerrit Loesch is trying to basically regurgitate here is frankly wrong. It's trying to trick witnesses into believing that the way Jehovah's Witnesses are run today is the same way as Christianity was run in the first century. When you actually read the New Testament on its own terms, it's very clear that that's not how it worked. Secondly, you will have noticed Gerrit Loesch saying that when some of the governing body were killed or died of sickness or old age, others were brought in, so that the governing body just continued and continued.
When some of them were killed or died of sickness or old age, other anointed ones were appointed to serve on that body.
What he is describing essentially is apostolic succession, which is ironic if you read Gerrit Loesch's life story, in which he cites apostolic succession as one of the problems he had as a Catholic before he became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Apostolic succession basically says the office of Pope has divine authority, and if the Pope dies, or when the Pope dies, the next Pope automatically takes the same authority. The next Pope succeeds the earlier Pope and assumes the same mantle of authority. There is no precedent for that in the scriptures. You do obviously have Judas Iscariot being unfaithful. The apostles cast lots to choose the replacement to Judas Iscariot, so that they still had 12. But that's really the only time that you hear of them bringing someone in to replace someone who has become unfaithful. I guess they felt they needed to have 12 and they needed to bring in a replacement. But there are no clear instructions saying this group of apostles just needs to keep on running for years and decades and centuries even with the same authority that I'm giving the original 12. You don't get Jesus saying that. But Watchtower needs that to be the case for the current arrangement that Jehovah's Witnesses are used to make sense. In the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, they insist that in 1919, the early Watchtower leaders, specifically Joseph Rutherford and his colleagues, were invisibly chosen to be the faithful and discreet slave. If you want to make that argument, you have to explain how it could be that these men, assuming they were chosen, clearly all died off and are no longer around. Watchtower says, don't worry about it. There's this apostolic succession, which we're not going to call apostolic succession, which means that when members of this faithful slave die, they get replaced by people who just so happen to have worked their way up the ladder in the Watchtower organization, and these automatically take their place. Again, you will be hard pressed to find a scriptural precedent for this. It's an entirely man-made device necessitated by the fact that Armageddon has taken way longer to arrive than early Watchtower leaders figured.
In the first century, the governing body was not only led by the Spirit, but in matters of doctrine, even inspired. Today, it's not inspired, but still led by the Spirit.
How convenient. In the first century, the apostles and older men were inspired by God's Holy Spirit, but today, the governing body aren't inspired by the Spirit, they're just led by the Spirit. Surely that means the same thing. If you're being inspired by someone, you're being guided by them, you're being led by them. All he is literally doing is replacing one set of words with another set of words that means basically the same thing. Of course, what this is all really about is giving the governing body a free pass for when they inevitably make mistakes. Because if, after all, they are inspired by God in the same way as the apostles were inspired by God, or in the same way as Moses was inspired by God, then there can be no excuses for mistakes and failed predictions, because the governing body know they're going to make mistakes and know they're not receiving instructions directly from God. They're giving themselves a free pass, and for the most part this seems to work with believing Jehovah's Witnesses.
After Brother Russell, Brother Rutherford became the president of the society, or a human leader at that time. Whereas at the beginning of his presidency, he strongly emphasized his position, he changed his attitude later, realizing he was not to be considered the number one or the leader. The book Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom, says on pages 220 and 21, quote, "At a convention in St. Louis, Missouri in 1941, shortly before his death, he spoke about the matter of leadership, saying, 'I want to let any strangers here know what you think about a man being your leader, so they won't forget. If there's any person in this audience who thinks that I, this man standing here, is the leader of Jehovah's Witnesses, say yes.' Well, the response was an impressive silence, broken only by an emphatic no from several in the audience. The speaker continued, 'If you who are here believe that I am just one of the servants of the Lord and you're working shoulder to shoulder in unity, serving God and serving Christ, say yes.' And in unison, the assembly roared out a decisive yes." End of quote.
I always get incensed when I see clear examples of historical revisionism in Jehovah's Witness videos, materials, you name it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Gerrit Loesch is being very clever. He must know that he's on very dodgy ground in pointing too much to Joseph Rutherford, given what we know now about Joseph Rutherford. And I would refer you to the videos that I've made about Rutherford and about his life. One thing that you cannot say about Joseph Rutherford, which Gerrit Loesch appears to be at least partially saying here, is that he was a humble, modest person who deflected any undue fame or attention. That's just simply not what we see when we look at Joseph Rutherford. Even Gerrit Loesch seems to acknowledge that towards the beginning of his presidency, he emphasized his position.
Whereas at the beginning of his presidency, he strongly emphasized his position.
I think that that's putting it mildly. Rutherford became president in 1917 amid quite some controversy. I'm now going to show you a Kingdom Messenger leaflet or brochure that was produced in 1931. So that's 14 years into his presidency. This brochure was produced promoting the conventions that were going on at that time and updating the Bible students or Jehovah's Witnesses as to what was going on organisationally. Look how Rutherford is referring to himself. He is their visible leader. He is the generalissimo. These are the words that this quiet, modest, unassuming brother, who was invisibly chosen by Jesus in 1919, conveniently, these are the words he's using to describe his position and his power. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. To suggest that the remarks he made at the 1941 St. Louis Convention entirely negate all of the obvious acts of egotism and narcissism within this man's presidency is simply ludicrous. Rutherford, in those remarks, is purely doing exactly what the governing body is doing today. Today, the governing body is saying, we're not your leaders, we're just the ones taking the lead. We're not inspired of God, we're just guided by God's Holy Spirit. It's word games. And by the way, if you want to quote Rutherford, it was at the 1941 St. Louis Convention that Brother Rutherford referred to women as a stack of bones and a hank of hair. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, you might be thinking, oh, there's no way that our dear Brother Rutherford would have referred to women in such a demeaning way on a convention platform. Well, I'm afraid you're in for a disappointment, because those words were immortalized in a Watchtower article reporting on the convention and reporting on what Rutherford said. So Gerrit Loesch is more than welcome to cherry pick the 1941 St. Louis Convention to find something that makes Brother Rutherford sound all meek and humble and modest. But let's add a little bit more context, shall we? And we'll quickly see that Rutherford is nowhere near the shining example of humility and modesty and soundness of mind that Watchtower would like witnesses to think of him as.
From January 1942 to June 1977, Brother Nathan Homer Knorr served as president of the society. Gradually, by divine influence, authority was shifted more and more from the president to a governing body, as the meaning of the term and the function was understood increasingly better.
Now we're hearing a slightly more accurate narrative of Watchtower history, albeit one that is still being filtered through the Watchtower lens. So now we're hearing that yes, the authority really rested with the president, but during the presidency of Nathan Knorr, things shifted so that a governing body was responsible for the spiritual food being administered to God's people, as the principle of a governing body came to be more clearly understood with the assistance of the Holy Spirit. What actually happened was, somehow or other, in the 1940s, Watchtower started referring to the leadership as a governing body, all in lowercase. So in the 1940s, they start referring to this idea of a governing body. It was all really Fred Franz's idea. And obviously, the more you refer to it, the more you kind of have to explain who this governing body is. And it was explained that the governing body was essentially the board of directors of the Watchtower Society, when in truth, again, all of the decisions were being made by the president, and he merely used the board of directors to implement his decisions. So it wasn't really any kind of governing body as we would know it today. It was only in 1971 that the governing body arrangement was formalized, and by 1975 these governing body members were saying, hang on a minute, why is it that we are supposed to be a governing body but we don't actually have any powers to govern? And this created a huge unrest. It resulted in Fred Franz doing a total 180, because the whole idea of a governing body had been his brainchild to begin with. But once he saw that it would potentially take away his power, because he could see that he was next in line to succeed Nathan Knorr as president of the society, once he saw that this brainchild of his was going to rob him of the authority that he was expecting, he joined Nathan Knorr in trying to shut down the whole thing. And because it was essentially Fred Franz and Nathan Knorr against the rest of the governing body, it was the governing body who won in 1975. They took control, and from that point forward, the office of president of the Watchtower Society became little more than a symbol. That's the true history of the organisation, which is spelled out very clearly in Crisis of Conscience, because Ray Franz, who wrote Crisis of Conscience, was a governing body member while all of this was happening, and he documents the whole process in exquisite detail. I think Gerrit Loesch is mindful of the fact that more and more ordinary witnesses, purely through their own research, I mean, you can find all this stuff out one way or the other just by reading the publications. I think Loesch is realising that this whole narrative that there has always been a governing body going all the way back to Russell and Rutherford doesn't make any sense once you actually consult the publications. So he's giving this talk about leadership to, number one, again, downplay the whole idea that the governing body are leaders, which again is nonsense, and number two, reframe Watchtower history so that it's more in line with what witnesses will read in their own publications, while at the same time putting Watchtower's spin on everything, namely that there has been this smooth progression from a leader-oriented organisation to a governing body, and that the whole thing was inspired and motivated by Jehovah.
Today, Jesus is still the leader, providing leadership for the congregations. He also directs the worldwide preaching work from heaven. However, he has delegated leadership to the faithful and discreet slave, the governing body, through whom he provides spiritual food at the proper time, in line with Matthew 24, 45 to 47.
And of course, in addition to being the leader of Jehovah's Witnesses, Jesus Christ is also invisible, making it impossible for us to speak to him and verify whether or not he has anything whatsoever to do with the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Isn't that convenient?
No member of the governing body has the title leader, since Jesus said that none of his disciples should be called leader. Matthew 23, 10 to 12.
Yes, we know all that, Gerrit. No individual member of the governing body is a leader. The governing body are leaders collectively. Oh, sorry, they're not leaders. They're just taking the lead.
The term governing body was used by us for the first time in the Watchtower of 1944, November 1, page 328, in the article Theocratic Organization in Action. But de facto, in 1944, there was no governing body with collective decision-making in operation yet. A historic change came on September 6, 1971. It was resolved that the chairmanship of the governing body would rotate annually among its members, doing so alphabetically. On October 1, 1971, Brother Frederick William Franz became the chairman of the governing body for 1 year, according to Proclaimer's book, page 106 and 7. Starting with 1971, the number of the members of the governing body was raised. Gradually, there were 18 members. When the governing body was formed, it was put in writing that all members consider themselves as equals to others. None were more equal than the others.
How delightful. Gerrit Loesch, ironically quoting from George Orwell's Animal Farm. But for the most part, what he's just described is more or less accurate. Rather than the governing body purely being expanded and having new rules as to how they would operate, really there was no governing body prior to 1971. In fact, if you watch the New World Society documentary, a black and white film, I think it's available on jw.org, and it was filmed in, I think, 1953. It starts off with a man going up to Brother Knorr's office, and it's very clear that the whole organisation is being run by Brother Knorr.
Taking an elevator to Bethel's 10th floor, we see the president's office, where matters of worldwide importance in gospel preaching activity are handled. At his desk, the Society's president, Brother Knorr, gives his secretary, Brother Henschel, some dictaphone recordings with letters of Christian instruction for the Society's branches. Brother Knorr makes a call, and Brother Henschel, also a director of the Watchtower Society, passes the records to the brother who will type them.
Arguably, you could say that Fred Franz also had a large role. He was basically the architect of the organization's teachings, including, to his dismay, eventually, the governing body teaching. But this was very much, make no mistake, a presidential organization with a single human leader. For the most part, it seems that Gerrit Loesch is realizing that witnesses are going to do their research. They're going to find out how recent the whole governing body arrangement really is. Even he admits there that the phrase governing body wasn't introduced to the literature until 1944. So you certainly can't describe there being a governing body before 1944 if they weren't even using that term. So for the most part, I'm actually quite pleased that he's included this material. It's just the word games, and particularly the revisionism surrounding Joseph Rutherford, that I resent.
The governing body also appoints helpers to assist them. This was instituted in 1992. Each of the governing body committees has helpers. There are over 30 helpers now. They participate at the meetings of the governing body committee to which they were assigned. They do not share in decision-making, but are offering observations and suggestions, and also they carry out the decisions made by the respective governing body committee.
I've included this material because it's interesting purely from the perspective of understanding the hierarchy of the organization. It's interesting to hear a governing body member describing the helper arrangement, and again, how recent the arrangement is. Clearly, he's not going to be able to point to any Bible verses that say, oh, in addition to there being a governing body, you need to have governing body helpers. We're recommending around 30. None of that can be found in the Bible. This is purely an arrangement that is necessitated by the organization being so big and there being so much work that you can't really expect 7 or 8 mostly aging men to be able to control everything that's going on. Also, in the context of a talk that is trying to tell Jehovah's Witnesses that there are no leaders, that everyone's equal, I'm not sure that that applies necessarily to the governing body helpers. When you watch or when you keep tabs on JW Broadcasting and you see who are the ones hosting it most regularly, you see that certain governing body helpers get used disproportionately. So that you can then argue, is there true equality even among governing body helpers? It seems to me that when you look at the individuals on the teaching committee in particular, those are helpers who get used disproportionately when it comes to hosting JW broadcasting and presenting various video material. I'm talking Ken Flodine, William Malenfant, Ron Curzon, Mark Newmair. These are individuals, David Schaefer. These are individuals who you see an awful lot of. So I'm not convinced that even at the governing body helper level, everyone has an equal role and an equal authority. I'm not entirely sure whether the same can be said of the governing body itself, whether there are any personalities that maybe impose themselves on other governing body members. I would imagine it's harder for a newer governing body member to be heard over an older, more established governing body member, but I have no way of knowing. But certainly when it comes to the governing body helpers, I am seeing some helpers with seemingly more prominence than others.
Who is the leader among congregation elders? Although all of them are to take the lead, none of them is to be considered number one. There is no rotation in place. In a sense, we could say that Jesus is number one, or the leader. He is the head of the congregation. The coordinators of the body of elders do not rotate, but they are aware that all elders are equals. None are more equals than the others.
Again, he's quoting there from Animal Farm, none are more equal than others. Just an irony overload. If you read Animal Farm and you understand what the message is that George Orwell was giving in that particular work. But here Gerrit Loesch is suggesting that there is equality among elders. He's suggesting that you don't have a situation, for example, where the coordinator of the body of elders is lording it over other elders. Well, I've been an elder, albeit for only 12 months, but what I saw in those 12 months led me to conclude otherwise. I have been in a congregation where the coordinator of a body of elders has used his position to have disproportionate power to other elders, to basically force home what he wants to do, irrespective of what's best for the congregation or what's the most loving thing to do. So as much as Gerrit Loesch would like witnesses to think that there's nothing special about the coordinator of the body of elders, having been an elder and having seen the way that position can be abused firsthand, again, I would suggest that I know different.
Jehovah is a wonderful God of comfort and relief. In stark contrast, Satan, the devil, is a horrible God of pain and suffering. In fact, if we think about it, even the so-called natural disasters that cause a lot of pain and suffering, Satan is the ultimate cause. Why do we say that? Well, by alienating humans from Jehovah, Satan deprived them of the Creator lovingly controlling the weather for their benefit. Additionally, humans under Satan's rule have grossly mismanaged the earth and its environmental provisions, resulting in erratic weather swings, which undoubtedly contributes to these so-called natural disasters. But how thankful, as we said, Jehovah is a God of comfort and relief. And one way he lives up to this title is by empowering and motivating us to share in a relief ministry in behalf of our brothers who have been pummeled by some catastrophe.
So yes, we're now going to get a talk all about how wonderful the organisation is when it comes to disaster aid and relief. But I'm sure you'll have joined me in just being aghast at the ignorance of what Stephen Lett was just saying there with regard to, well, basically climate change. He's suggesting that Satan is responsible for it, because if Satan hadn't misled Adam and Eve, Jehovah would be lovingly controlling the weather, which actually isn't an entirely alien concept to Jehovah's Witness teachings, because you've even had videos on JW Broadcasting where typhoons delivering sand for construction have been attributed to Jehovah's hand.
Another experience that really stands out to me is an experience we had on the island of Yap. Again, this was an island, which is ironic that you can't really get sand on because there's no companies that sell it. So what you do is you go from village to village asking the village chief if he would be willing to sell sand off of his beach. Well, after visiting all the villages, no one was willing to sell any of their sand that we needed. At that point, things got worse because there was a typhoon approaching the island. So we just had the construction crew stop work. So the next morning we were able to get in contact with the construction overseer on the island. And he said, I've got really good news. There was no damage. The storm took a turn just before it hit the island and just grazed it. He says, I have some other good news. I just got a call from the village chiefs. Apparently the storm surge had washed up a bunch of sand over their road to their villages, and they had no way of removing it. So they said, we have plenty of sand. Can you come and help us get rid of it? So we ended up having enough sand for the rest of the project. Jehovah's blessing is the most important thing that we can have on our projects.
You even had the example when the 2013 Revised Bible Edition was released at an annual meeting, incidentally.
It's interesting when we think about the production of this, we truly have seen Jehovah's hand in helping the project. Just one example, the brothers in the Wallkill Printery mentioned to us that normally the worst time of the year to print Bibles is summertime. Because of the humidity, the heat, oftentimes they have to stop the presses. But they told us this year, when they had to do a lot of extra overtime to get these Bibles ready for us, and as you can see, there's one for each person here attending our program. This year, there was no stoppage of Bible production. We had the mildest summer for many, many years, and we thank Jehovah for that.
So witnesses are already no stranger to the idea that Jehovah controls the weather, which, if you think about it, makes it even more curious as to how it can be that witnesses die during weather events. So in other words, how is Jehovah controlling the weather to deliver sand for construction, or controlling the weather so that more Bibles can be printed, while at the same time allowing witnesses to die due to weather events, as we're going to see? But yeah, just this whole idea that Satan is to blame, or mankind is to blame to some extent, from what Stephen Lett was saying, for climate change. I mean, what more do you need to say? Ladies and gentlemen, this is what the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses are teaching. If you are watching this video as someone who is casually interested in Jehovah's Witnesses and entertaining the idea that they might have something informed or educational to say about climate change, well, this is it. They think Satan causes climate change.
Enjoy, please, this video showing how our brothers in Indonesia were helped to resume quickly their spiritual routine after the devastating earthquake and tsunami of 2018.
Four days after the earthquake, evacuation of 132 people began.
On Thursday morning, the day after the evacuation, 4 of us from the branch arrived in Poso. A combined meeting of Poso and Palu congregations was held, and a talk was delivered by a member of the branch committee.
It was important to take care of the spiritual needs of the brothers and sisters. And amazingly, not a single meeting was missed. And several of us from the branch office gave encouraging talks to the publishers there. Meeting for field service were also held, and the publishers, they went out preaching just a couple of days after they had arrived.
We had the opportunity to go out preaching in Poso. Many people were interested in discussing the events that took place in Palu. They listened to the Bible's message and asked to be visited again.
After meeting for field service at the Poso Kingdom Hall, we had the opportunity to play sign language videos from gw.org to several deaf ones.
Even though we were struck by a natural disaster, we were still able to carry out spiritual routines. I'm very grateful to Jehovah, the brothers from the branch office, and others whose prayers, examples, and presence really help us to endure and keep on relying on Jehovah no matter what.
By means of our relief ministry, we prove we're imitators of the God of comfort and relief. And we also prove that we're obeying the command in Ephesians 5:1 and 2, which says, become imitators of God as beloved children and go on walking in love.
So as you may have guessed, this annual meeting, like other annual meetings before it, is going to be strewn with propaganda videos. We've just had one there talking about how wonderful the organisation was in its response to an earthquake in Indonesia. Really, the whole message for me in that brief video is that spiritual things come first when there's a natural disaster. We need to keep our spiritual routine going. Yes, there's only just been an earthquake, but quick, let's all get out in the streets with our literature and let's try to recruit people into our organisation. What we're seeing here is exploitative behaviour. Watchtower is leaping on a natural disaster, or local Jehovah's Witnesses, encouraged by their leadership, are leaping on a natural disaster as basically a canvassing opportunity so that they can point to the devastation all around them and say, wouldn't you like to live in a world where none of this happens because Jehovah controls the weather?
Now, if you think about it, we're really created to imitate Jehovah. We're made in His image, aren't we? In contrast, animals cannot imitate Jehovah, the God of unselfish love and comfort and relief. For example, you can't imagine a dog thinking to himself, you know, I really feel bad about taking that bone away from the other dog. In the future, I'm really going to try to be more unselfish. You can't imagine a horse looking up at a beautiful sunset. My, that sunset makes me love my Creator more. I'm going to try to please Him more in the future. You can't imagine an eagle praying, Lord, thank you very much for the fish I'm about to eat. No, animals are not made in God's image. We are. We can imitate our wonderful God of comfort and relief and of love.
Yes, it's the Stephen Lett stand-up routine at the 2019 annual meeting there. Gosh, I wonder how long it took him to come up with those jokes. And clearly they're going down well. I mean, let's face it. If you're a Jehovah's Witness in the audience and a governing body member is on stage cracking jokes, instinctively you're going to laugh because you're going to want to make them feel good, even if the jokes are terrible. And these jokes really are terrible. I'm not really sure whether whatever point he's trying to make is important enough to make his audience contemplate eagles praying to thank God for the fish they're about to eat. I think we all understand that eagles aren't religious, horses aren't religious, dogs aren't religious. But yeah, at least we got treated to a little bit of levity there by Mr. Lett.
Please enjoy this video. Relief workers from the United States, Indonesia, and Africa springing into action to help their brothers.
We are so happy to be able to come and help rebuild the damaged houses so that the brothers feel secure living in them. We see this as evidence that we have brotherly love toward one another.
It's been a faith-strengthening event, not just for the families affected directly by the fire, but for all of us helping out. We've had the privilege to watch Jehovah do so much for his people. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. It's very faith-strengthening to know that Jehovah never abandons us.
Right after the cyclone hit here in Beirut, we were privileged to be able to come up here and help out.
It felt really good to be there, to be able to help the brothers to face an extremely difficult situation. I learned a lot during this time. Always, always, always follow Jehovah's direction. This is good for us.
We're actually putting a roof back on their Kingdom Hall. It was completely destroyed during the storm. And the idea is the memorial's next week. They're going to be able to come back to their Kingdom Hall, which will be fixed up and celebrate the memorial. So we're happy to be a part of that.
I guess this must be impressive if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you're conditioned to think that love is all about looking after your own. Love is all about looking after your fellow worshippers and making sure they're okay. That for me is not what love is about. And I don't want to repeat myself too much, because this whole thing about the disaster work keeps popping up time and time again. You hear the exact same narrative from Watchtower, and I end up having to repeat myself, namely that this is disaster relief work purely for Jehovah's Witnesses, by Jehovah's Witnesses, for Jehovah's Witnesses. Come back when you're doing this for ordinary members of the public, irrespective of what their beliefs are. Second of all, I'm not convinced that all of this is entirely above board. We're seeing here a focus on repairing Kingdom Halls. In other words, repairing Watchtower assets. Oh no, there's been a natural disaster. Quick, let's repair our assets. Let's make it so that local Jehovah's Witnesses stay indoctrinated. We can't have any break in their indoctrination. Furthermore, and I don't speak about this too much, but I think it's worth noting, and I will place a heavy caveat, which is that I don't have any documented evidence that this is happening. It's just that I have heard multiple reports from well-placed witnesses involved in the disaster relief work that when a hurricane hits, when a typhoon hits, when there's a wildfire, and the witnesses go in there to repair the homes of witnesses, what they will do is say, you need to give us your insurance money. So you need to literally give us the check that your insurance company gives you, give that to us, and we're going to do the work that you could have, if you wanted to, outsourced to a local building firm. That's what I'm hearing actually happens, particularly in the United States when there's a disaster. Now, so far, that's purely anecdotal. Maybe at some future point, we'll get proof that this is what's happening. If it really is happening, then it's unquestionably a scam. But speaking of scams, one thing we can definitely say about the disaster relief work is that Watchtower is not above profiting from natural disasters by building a bunch of new Kingdom halls and then almost immediately selling them. That's what happened in Puerto Rico. We learned that 100 Kingdom halls were rebuilt using volunteer labour, mostly from mainland America. So a bunch of witnesses all come to Puerto Rico and help build 100 Kingdom halls. And only a year or so later, as I covered in one of my recent videos, 50 of them were up for sale. So they literally used a natural disaster as an opportunity to sell real estate. That's the reality of the disaster work that Stephen Lett is apparently so proud of. But hey, it could be worse. At least he hasn't asked anyone for any money yet.
Additionally, we're united in giving contributions. See, we give generously as cheerful givers. And those who have been helped, what do? Subsequently, they in turn help others who are afflicted with their contributions. In fact, here are some statistics about the great magnitude of our relief ministry just during the past 2 service years. Now, during these 2 service years alone, more than 900,000 of our brothers have been affected, almost a million. 62,000 of them being displaced, 190 injured. Sadly, 64 were killed. More than 700 Kingdom halls were damaged or destroyed. More than 15,000 homes damaged or destroyed. The organization spent $49.5 million on relief efforts just during these 2 service years. I mean, that's almost $50 million just 2 service years. Obviously, our relief ministry has taken on gigantic proportions.
So I found these numbers interesting. Now, who knows how accurate they are? For all we know, Watchtower could just be completely plucking numbers out of who knows where. But taken at face value, what we have is, again, 64 Jehovah's Witnesses losing their lives through, I'm assuming, mostly natural disasters caused by the weather in 2 years. And yet already we've had it suggested that Jehovah can control the weather. And again, if you look back at some of the things that have been said by governing body members and in Watchtower video propaganda, there's repeatedly an insinuation that when it suits Watchtower, when it suits Watchtower's agenda, Jehovah can control the weather, indeed has controlled the weather. Well, what about those 64 witnesses who died? And I didn't see, maybe I'm being overly skeptical or overly cynical, but I didn't see too much sadness from Stephen Lett that 64 witnesses died in that period. Also, just a little note about the 49,500,000 figure. That was over 2 years, 2018 and 2019, meaning that you're looking at $25 million a year. And what's interesting is that we did a Watchtower in Focus on dedicated funds, where we picked apart a leaked video from Watchtower's financial team in which they divulged that, I think it was for the year 2017, their contingency fund for a single year was $25 million. And we commented at the time that that's not a lot of money for an organization as big as Jehovah's Witnesses, with the amount of money that they're receiving between $1 and $2 billion per year. You would think they would have more of a contingency. Call me skeptical, I just find the $50 million figure a little too convenient. When we know that in 1 year their contingency fund was $25 million, it's almost as though Watchtower wants to be receiving that amount extra from witnesses on a yearly basis. So they've just put the two $25 million contingency funds for 2 years together and said, this is what we would like to be receiving. Again, maybe that's not what's happened. Maybe they really did spend $49.5 million on disasters, but even if they did, it's not purely an expense when they're using these disasters to turn a profit.
To help you appreciate how your donations are being used, please enjoy this video showing before and after pictures of homes of our brothers after Cyclone Idai struck in Africa. Just for your information, those homes that were rebuilt that you saw there, some were rebuilt, some were repaired, the cost to repair ranged from $50 to $900 per home. The cost to rebuild was from $900 to $3,500 for each home. Now, as you saw, the rebuilt homes are not extravagant, but the brothers often ended up with something a lot better than what they had before, because of the use of improved building materials. And undoubtedly, this will help them better weather future storms.
At this point, I think Stephen Let's Talk is just blatantly an attempt to ask for more donations, more money from Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, are we supposed to be impressed that the organization is only helping fellow believers? Are we supposed to be impressed that teams of witnesses are descending on the homes of their fellow believers and helping them rebuild? There's nothing extraordinary going on there. When you look at this parable of the Good Samaritan, the whole point of that parable was that you should be helping people irrespective of whether they agree with your beliefs or not. And yet what we've seen so far has just been a celebration of the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses look after their own. I'm not blown away or impressed by stories from Africa of tiny dwellings being repaired and rebuilt with volunteer labour. It's not like the governing body are going out there and helping with the building. This is all volunteer labour that's getting this done. Presumably, building materials will be much cheaper in these countries. You're not telling me that anything extraordinary is going on here, but the message seems to be, look at what we're doing in these impoverished parts of the world. Help us do it more by giving us your cash. Meanwhile, all I can think of when I see those photographs of rebuilt houses is, my gosh, these people have so little, and on top of living in an economically deprived part of the world, they're also having to deal with being involved in a cult that's taking them for granted, that's taking advantage of them, that's swallowing up their time and whatever modest resources they have, because they'll be expected to donate as well. You're not telling me that the likes of Stephen Lett or Tony Morris would put up with living in a home like that. But they'll quite gladly take the donations from these parts of the world and use them to build shiny new facilities at Ramapo so that they can keep churning out this propaganda material.
But at this point, we'd like to just take a moment and thank you, dear brothers, commend you for your generous contributions, which make our relief ministry possible. You can be sure Jehovah is well pleased. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse number 16, we're told, "Moreover, do not forget to do good and to share what you have with others, for God is well pleased with such sacrifices." And I love that thought, not just pleased, He's well pleased with your generosity. So thank you very much. And the governing body thanks you from the bottom of our hearts. Our brothers and sisters who have been helped, they thank you from the bottom of their hearts.
Again, it's all purely about asking for money. And why wouldn't it be? I touched on this recently in a video called Watchtower's Biggest Problem. There's this huge imbalance which you can actually see in the figures when you compare the service reports with the figures on poverty for different countries. You can see that there's a disproportionate amount of growth in poor countries where people are living on less than $5.50 per day, and wealthier countries where growth is stagnating. That is not sustainable moving forward. Watchtower does have a big problem with its cash flow. And of course, they're going to try and correct that by using any opportunity to remind witnesses to donate their cash. On this particular occasion, they are shamelessly making use of natural disasters to pull on the heartstrings and get witnesses to part with their money.
Jehovah has really helped us out in this disaster, using the brotherhood to strengthen and encourage us in ways we've never seen before. And it's really drawn us closer to Him.
Jehovah, through His organization, gave me two wonderful people that were there to take care of my needs, my wants. Everything I needed was handled through them. Just having someone that you can talk to, just having people that care. I've been in the truth almost 50 years, and I've always had friends, and it's always been loving and good, but I have never felt as loved by Jehovah.
The service department called and warned that a big storm would arrive one Thursday.
We saw the true love that the branch office had for us, and we followed their example. We risked our lives to inform the brothers to come to the Kingdom Hall.
The brothers from the branch were constantly in contact with us. I found that really encouraging. Until very late in the evening, they were sending us messages, telling us that they are still up praying for us. Those messages were a great comfort to us. The organization has been helping us so much emotionally. The branch sent representatives to provide shepherding and also a variety of food, good, nutritious food. All of this has really been impressive, and we want to thank Jehovah for the way He's been caring for us.
What Jehovah's organization is doing right now is far superior to anything the human governments have been doing.
We really want to say thank you. We really feel Jehovah's love.
Seeing that video motivates us even more so to want to help our brothers by means of our donations, but also by means of our labor. Now, speaking of labor, we're happy to inform you that later in our program, Brother Loesch will tell you about a new provision for applying to help with relief work and other needs in the organization. So stay tuned for that revealing of that information.
Oh, don't worry, Stephen. I'll stay tuned for absolutely everything. Don't you worry about that. But yes, again, this is all about asking for money using natural disasters. And quite frankly, when you watch these videos, the message seems to be you're not going to survive a natural disaster unless you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness, which of course is absolute nonsense. You know, if a natural disaster hit Croatia, for example, which is where I live, I like to think that me and my family would be no worse off than Jehovah's Witnesses living locally. You can survive a natural disaster whether you're in a cult or not. You don't need a cult to get you through a natural disaster, to supply you with instructions to come riding into town and put up tents. No, I think you can survive natural disasters without that. And again, if you're an organisation that prides yourself on riding into town and putting up tents and handing out beans, why aren't you doing that for everyone? Why are you doing that only for members of your club? Which brings me to the story of Margaret, this older lady who is waxing lyrical about how the brothers are so loving and they're so caring and they've cared for my every need. What Margaret doesn't understand, or probably hasn't had an opportunity to understand yet in her life, is that all of this love is entirely conditional. Just as receiving help during a disaster is conditional on being a Jehovah's Witness, receiving love and care and support as an older witness is conditional on being a Jehovah's Witness. And indeed, I'm sure many of you watching this will be able to think of examples of old people who've been let down, even though they're Jehovah's Witnesses. They've just been forgotten about. So you can't just point to one old lady who's happy about her experience and suggest that this is the experience of all older Jehovah's Witnesses, because I'm fairly sure it isn't.
Neighbors, family members, government officials see our love in action. As a result, some actually come into the truth. Please enjoy this video, an unbelieving husband coming into the truth as a result of our relief ministry.
I always loved my family. I wanted the best for them, so I worked to provide for them. That's my duty. My wife got baptized 2 years before me. I built our home right here. Then one day, our lives changed forever. This is my house, so I have to start again. 2 brothers came to see me. They said, "Don't worry about a thing. Everything will be all right. The brothers will take care of it." I thought, I don't know if he knows what he's talking about. When the brothers started showing up at my place to help, I was thinking, why would they help me? They don't know me. Every morning I watched the brothers, and when they finished praying, everyone grabbed their tools and got to work. I told my wife that this is unbelievable. When I saw an elderly sister carrying concrete blocks, they were so heavy for her. I ran inside with tears in my eyes. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. I thought, something is wrong with them for sure, or something is wrong with me. I began to appreciate what they did and how they acted. A lot of love. That's the only way I can put it. A lot of love. They even shared their food with me. They made it clear that this work was a sign of Jehovah's love. And all those things touched my heart. They let me know that, man, this organization is for real. and it's the truth. I wanted to be part of that. I decided to give my life to Jehovah because he showed me how much he loves both me and my family. Now I take care of my family better than ever before.
I decided to give my life to Jehovah because he built me a house. That is not a good reason to join a religion. And quite frankly, it's obvious to anyone why they came to build that house. As I've said before, the relief work is entirely JW-centric to begin with. This guy just happened to be married to a Jehovah's Witness, so her home was included in the list of homes that were to be rebuilt when all these volunteers rolled into town. And yeah, they built this guy a house, and apparently that proved that this is God's one and only true organisation on the earth. Just because a cult rolls into town and does something nice for you with strings attached doesn't make it God's one true organisation. And what's even crazier for me is that having done this, again with strings attached, to convince him, you could say, to become a Jehovah's Witness, what they've then done is, a number of years later, a film crew has rolled into town with some Jehovah's Witnesses in high-vis gear and with some tools and with a pickup truck with concrete blocks in the back. And they've said, you know that time when we built you a home so that you would become a Jehovah's Witness? Do you mind if we reenact doing that? Because we want to use this to recruit even more witnesses or to convince existing witnesses that we're this fabulous organisation. In other words, we want to blow our trumpet over what it is that we did for you. Do you mind if you just put up with some cameras in your face and around your property while we make a short video about this fabulous thing that we did for you?
Jehovah's organization now cares for almost 80,000 buildings worldwide. With a total area of more than 215 million square feet, or 20 million square meters. That is the area of about 2,800 soccer fields, or 6 times the area of Central Park in Manhattan. The scores of branch office buildings, hundreds of assembly halls, and tens of thousands of kingdom halls around the world provide tangible proof that God's kingdom is ruling. Why can we say that? As Psalm 127:1 reminds us, none of this would be possible without Jehovah's blessing. Like Nehemiah and the Jews who rebuilt Jerusalem's walls, we are confident that the good hand of our God is upon us.
A building itself may last 30, 60, or even 100 years. But building systems may reach the end of their life after only 15 or 20 years. So many of our facilities are in need of major renovation or replacement. Activities at Bethel are also changing. So interior layouts sometimes need to be updated.
All of this presents a challenge. How do we take care of our Bethel facilities and still keep up with the work on our kingdom halls? Indeed, what is the need? How can we address it? And how can you help? Join us now on an encouraging trip around the world. We want to show you what's being done and planned for our branch facilities. Fasten your seatbelts, please. This report will be moving quickly.
I just don't recognize this organization anymore. I mean, gosh, it's unrecognizable from the sober, kind of serious organization I'm familiar with, where there was at least a pretense that it's all about saving people. It's all about the preaching work. It's all about printing life-saving spiritual food. All of that just seems to have gone out of the window in past years, and now it's all about construction, 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 property, property, property. Let's focus on the 80,000 properties that we own worldwide, the 215 million square feet of Watchtower assets that need to be looked after and renovated and expanded. And by the way, all of this is proof. All of this work that we're doing to improve Watchtower assets, which can then be sold on at a profit, is proof of Jehovah's hand on his organisation. And to impress you all with the grand scope of what we're doing, we're going to take you on a world tour on this jet plane with Alex Reinmuller as your host. Gosh, it was actually Alex Reinmuller who we were talking about in the previously mentioned Dedicated Funds Watchtower in Focus episode. He seems to be the guy who is kind of holding the purse strings for Watchtower. It was he who revealed the 25 million amount of contingency funds for that year in question, which again I think was 2017. So I find it interesting that he is the one who is presenting this fabulous round the world jet tour of Watchtower improving its property assets. He knows how much money this is making. He is very much in on Watchtower's master plan of selling Kingdom Halls rather than building them. So, gosh, I mean, the whole thing is cheesy, but when you factor in who it is that's presenting this material and what his role is within the organisation, it just gets a little bit too much.
At times, it makes more sense to renovate or redevelop what we already have. Major renovations have already started in branches that need it the most.
The governing body would like to see more of the Bethelites care for their own personal services. The offices always used to be individual for one person. Now it's better if the office is open and use dividers, because these can be easily changed, modified according to the necessity of the work.
Well, Patterson is a beautiful and practical complex. I don't think anyone envisioned when the complex was built that we would have over 1,000 of our brothers and sisters visiting Bethel every day. But having a visitor center is going to give them an improved tour experience here at Patterson, and at the same time make sure that departments are able to do their work.
Under the guidance of the governing body, was decided that we will stop printing in Finland and use the space of the old printery for new offices and on other purposes. We were a little concerned, where would we find all the needed volunteers? When we told about our needs to local congregations, the applications started to flow in. We realized that here we have our fine young brothers and sisters. It has been touching, really touching to see their willing spirit.
Even in a video that is essentially manipulating witnesses to get out their wallets and throw money at Watchtower, there are clues as to what the real agenda is here. I mean, they're talking here about making buildings as multifunctional as possible. Oh, we've had the brainwave that instead of having small offices, we should have larger offices with just ordinary office dividers, the same as have been used by ordinary companies for decades, and which will probably make the building easier to sell on. I mean, it's just obvious what's happening. They haven't received some brainwave that this is how Jehovah wants them to do things. They are making their buildings more sellable. This is all about making Watchtower assets more easy to liquidate if the need arises. And I'm sorry, I just wasn't taken in by what that guy was saying from the Finnish Bethel when he was saying, oh, we were really panicking. We were really worried about where are we going to find all of the volunteer labour that we need to do all of this labour free of charge. How could we possibly come across an army of volunteers? And we were surprised when we found that when we put the call out, the local brothers came to our rescue. Don't be silly. Don't be silly. Don't lie to us. We're not stupid. We know that you were expecting all along that you would get the volunteer labour. And that's the true scam that's going on here. Watchtower is enhancing its property portfolio. We heard there 80,000 properties worldwide. These are properties under Watchtower's control. Watchtower pockets the proceeds from selling them, but they are built, they are maintained, they are renovated free of charge. All Watchtower has to pay for is the materials, and occasionally if they need to outsource a certain complicated task to worldly contractors, for the most part, they are profiting directly from volunteer labour.
The kingdom preaching work has sped up in our branch territory. We've experienced a 4% increase in Cameroon like we've never experienced before. We're now translating into 29 different languages. We did consider renovating our present location. But how do you continue the work in a tiny branch while a renovation is happening around you? We had a piece of land right next to one of our major assembly halls in one of the biggest cities in our branch territory. But sadly, the access was terrible. A dirty, muddy road, very difficult to access either in car or on foot. All of a sudden, something amazing happens. The local government decides to build a road right outside our assembly hall, thus giving us access to this piece of land. It was Jehovah saying, this is the piece of land where you should build a new Cameroon branch.
We needed a buyer who would agree to buy the facility at the right price, give us enough money in advance to pay for the new branch, and allow us to keep using the existing branch till the new one is ready. We felt very helpless. Just a few days before we were scheduled to sign up for the new branch, a buyer who'd shown interest but had not yet committed anything signed a binding agreement and met all our conditions. He also provided a large amount of non-refundable deposit to help us to purchase the new branch. Nothing is impossible for Jehovah. He timed everything perfectly.
Many more projects like these are in the planning stage. We want all of our properties to keep meeting the organization's needs and reflecting well on Jehovah.
So this is where it gets really irritating for me. You'll remember that at the beginning, I pointed to what Isaac Murray was saying when he was introducing the annual meeting, talking about how there would be encouraging talks that would give proof that Jehovah is blessing the organization. Well, this is basically what he was referring to, or this is the sort of material he was referring to, which is strewn throughout this annual meeting, where they point to perfectly mundane developments and say, Jehovah did this. This was Jehovah's hand. Jehovah wanted us to build this new branch or renovate this complex, whatever, in Cameroon. So the local city planners, he had them build a new road. Only with Jehovah would this have been possible. And then you have the story in India of where they need a buyer, the clock's ticking, and a buyer emerges. I'm sure the buyer, by the way, would have been familiar with what the time scale was and what the urgency was. And just finding a buyer, apparently, is evidence of Jehovah's hand. By the way, this buyer who put up all this money and made this marvelous building work possible, he's going to be toast at Armageddon if Armageddon were to come tomorrow, even though he's made this project possible, if he doesn't become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. What do we learn about a God who manipulates city planners in Cameroon to divert a road, or manipulates a businessman to sign a non-binding agreement just in the nick of time, but allows 9 million children to die every year before they reach the age of 5? Indeed, allows 64 Jehovah's Witnesses in 2 years to die from natural disasters. What are we learning about the God who does this? Is a God who is obsessed with construction and obsessed with building and obsessed with enhancing Watchtower's property assets, but not remotely interested in preserving human life and stopping suffering? Is such a God worthy of even a moment's adoration or praise? I would argue no.
The number of publishers, commuters, remote volunteers, and Bethelites has increased worldwide. Some countries have seen an increase of 5, 7, or more % in the number of publishers each year.
2 claims have just been made by Daniel Mulcan, assuming that's how you pronounce his name. One, that the number of publishers keeps going up. Well, depends what you mean by going up. I think it's safe to say that the increase is stagnant. It's 1.3% for the last service year, so hardly anything to write home about. He says publishers are increasing and Bethelites are increasing. Well, what about that time, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, where they sent a whole bunch of Bethelites packing? They decided to simplify the organisation by effectively sacking scores of special pioneers and Bethelites. If you're one of those Bethelites who got turfed out and told to go pioneer in some congregation somewhere, having no real savings, just assuming that Watchtower is going to take care of you and then being utterly left to your own devices, what are you going to be thinking when you hear, oh, the number of Bethelites is increasing? And you're like, well, I was quite happy to be a Bethelite until I got sent away. So it's either one or the other. Either you need to simplify or you need Bethelites. I've never understood this dual message that Watchtower keeps banging on about. The second claim that's made is that some countries have seen an increase of over 5% in publisher growth in consecutive years. I decided to make a list of what those countries are, bearing in mind that the total number of countries, I'm going to have to put it on the screen, the exact number, but it's around 230 lands that Jehovah's Witnesses are in. So I thought, okay, he's making a big deal about a bunch of countries where they've had consecutive growth of over 5% in consecutive years. What are these countries? And I found out what they are. Bear with me. My laptop's all the way down there. Sudan, Mozambique, Uganda, Congo Democratic Republic of, Angola, Timor-Leste, Myanmar, Liberia, Zambia, Congo Republic of, so both of the Congos, Mali, Equatorial Guinea, and Turkey. Those 13 countries out of hundreds of countries managed to achieve growth of over 5% in consecutive years. Hardly anything worth shouting about, especially when the overwhelming majority of those countries are riddled with poverty and are therefore fertile ground for Jehovah's Witnesses to go in and exploit people's suffering and misery.
The organization pursues every avenue to make our Bethel operations more efficient, but we will always need people to do much of the work. Therefore, planning has already begun to see where additional expansion might be needed.
We have many world headquarters departments involved in the planning process to get input. Also, the branch committee is involved in this. Before any facility is recommended for expansion, questions are asked. For example, is this expansion going to directly advance the preaching and teaching activity in the country? Could it be that with some operational changes, the function of the branch could be discontinued in some way, or outsourced, or simplified in some way to mean that we wouldn't need to expand? With recent changes in Bethel operations, it is possible for us now to buy standard apartments and offices for a Bethel facility. If we need more offices and apartments, we buy them from the market. And as these options are investigated, we look for Jehovah's hand in this. What is evidence that His Spirit is behind one of these options?
The governing body has asked all of us to give priority to those activities that contribute the most to the spiritual welfare of God's people and the advancement of the global preaching work.
There is definitely a lot to do, but it is really exciting to see the good hand of Jehovah on His people today.
The brothers and sisters everywhere are zealously supporting this work with their time, financial resources, and prayers.
We are confident that Jehovah God will continue to bless the collective efforts to provide the facilities the organization needs.
Thank you for your loyal support in the days ahead of all these important initiatives. Jehovah will bless you too for your willing and generous spirit. And now, it's time for us too to get up and build.
Get up and build. That's what it's all about, apparently. If you're God's one true organisation on the earth, your duty is to expand your real estate portfolio. That's what's going to bring God's blessing. That's what's going to bring people into the organisation. Again, this organisation is fast becoming unrecognisable from what I remember. And yes, to a degree, there was always at least some emphasis on building work, but never to this degree, where it was all they seemed to bang on about all the time. And again, pointing to mundane developments as though this is evidence of Jehovah's hand. If you want to worship a God like that, fine. But I see nothing impressive whatsoever. What I see in this video is just a typical man-made human operation that is expanding its real estate. What they've been describing in terms of planning, in terms of financing, in terms of their whole worldwide construction operation strategy could be in any corporate video. We could have been watching a video by Coca-Cola or Microsoft or Google or anything. There is nothing at all extraordinary in what we've just seen. But that's what the organisation has become. Obsessed with property, and they are dangling this as a reason for witnesses to get out their wallets and give Watchtower money.
We searched our archived video files and found some comments from some brothers who were involved in property acquisition in years past. These comments predate the more recent decision to move world headquarters out of Brooklyn, New York. Please enjoy this faith-strengthening video entitled A Historic Look at Property Acquisition.
Back in 1926, Rutherford wanted the block where 30 Columbia Heights is. And he was trying to buy it, and it kept getting problems and obstacles. So finally told him, get something else. 1927, Squibb bought it. And in that block, they had to sink over 1,600 pilings, 8-inch cylinders, some as much as 90 feet to get solid terrain, and fill all those with concrete. Tremendous expense. Had the society got a purpose to build there, they may not have the money to do the two jobs, the footings and the building. So there was a case where Jehovah blocked it because of that, and finally we got 117 Adams. Well, I was down in North Carolina at the paper mill that makes all of our Bible paper. And I happened to mention to them, we're trying to expand in Brooklyn, but just can't find property. And the president said, would you be interested in squib? I said, we sure would. We don't think that's available. He said, I can tie you in on that if you're interested. So he got a hold of it and set it all up for it. $3 million cash. We never expected to get it for that. There's 10 buildings involved. This case just shows Jehovah's direction matters.
They're doing it again and again and again. Jehovah's direction, Jehovah's hand. Jehovah is obsessed with making sure we have the buildings that we want when we want them. So if something fortuitous happens, if some squib company gets to buy a building when we can't and then ends up with more expense and then we get to profit purely because of the timing and everything, this is Jehovah's hand. This proves Jehovah's direction on the whole project. What does that say again about God? If that's what God's been up to, while there's been all of this human suffering and human tragedy, some of which is going on in the organisation, which the organisation has an opportunity to do something about but won't because of its obsession with certain Bible verses to do with two witnesses. All of that's going on, and apparently the whole while Jehovah's just obsessed with steering the organisation's property planning so that they have what properties they need when they need them.
Well, back in 1960, when we bought that much land, we had no idea of a printery, but what did the Lord have in mind for it? He had in mind to put the printery there. We were zealously going after farms, but we didn't need string beans and potatoes. We needed books and Bibles printed up there. And so we see the good results of it today.
What a difference. Who could ever think that Watchtower Farms could turn into being the United States branch of Jehovah's Witnesses? That, to me, is a wonderful example of Jehovah leading the organization.
What? That's an example of Jehovah leading the organisation. The fact that you guys bought a farm and at some point decided to stop using it as a farm and instead use it as a printery and then eventually use it as the United States branch office. Who would have thought that could be possible? That we would change our minds about what to do with a certain property and how to use it. Only with Jehovah's direction could we make such decisions about our properties.
Today we have millions in the truth, and the Bible tells us that we're going to grow and fill the earth. How many millions of people will have in the truth when Armageddon comes? We don't know. We don't know when Armageddon's coming. We're not going backwards. We're going to continue to go ahead, doing things more efficient, or it means you're going to have to expand. You're going to have to build. So you have to always be looking ahead.
Right to the end, we're going to be giving out spiritual food at the right time. We don't know what the Lord's going to use after the Great Tribulation, immediately. As Brother Couch said, and Brother Larson felt the same way. The Lord is running the organization, so we got to follow him. And whatever he tells us, we do it.
We don't know what the Lord has in mind. It might be that the Lord wants us to continue building and continue printing and continue preaching for decades and decades and centuries into the future. We don't know what he has in mind. hang on, I thought Armageddon was coming. I thought it was coming imminently. Isn't it the case that in 140 years of literature, you guys have been saying Armageddon's coming any moment? And now what you seem to be saying is, oh, well, we don't know. We're just going to keep on expanding our property portfolio and the Lord's going to be directing us. And no matter what happens, even if it's the most mundane thing, even if it's just us changing our minds about how we use a certain property, we're going to say it's Jehovah's direction.
We live in a time when technology has allowed us to communicate the truth of God's Word in new and exciting ways. Our modern world has seen advancements in printing, radio, television, computers, and, of course, the Internet. You likely can remember a time just a few short years ago when we released only a handful of videos every year. But these now number into the hundreds, with videos created for use in the ministry, midweek meetings, JW broadcast programming, regional conventions, and we can't forget the Become Jehovah's Friend series.
Jehovah's organization has made use of videos over the years, over the decades, but from 2014 forward, we have seen a dramatic increase in the use of videos, and that has really impacted how we teach and how we reach hearts. Because of the demand for more videos, more space was needed, so we purchased the Mount Ebal property, and there we have been making many of our large video productions. Well, the response from the brothers and sisters in the field has been outstanding. It's been amazing. It's actually been very encouraging for the teaching committee and the governing body to see how the brothers and sisters appreciate the videos, the music, and the recordings that are produced. It's helping them to really understand the teaching points in God's Word. It helps them to deal with the anxieties and pressures of life. It really helps them to appreciate, too, what's happening around the world when they hear reports, dramatizations, and interviews.
It helps them, Ron, to stay indoctrinated. That's what it's all about. That's what this flow of video propaganda since 2014, when the JW broadcasting started, that's been the aim all along. You know, month in, month out, I'm doing my rebuttals and I'm really struggling to come up with fresh criticisms or fresh things to say, because what I'm seeing is just the same thing, to the point where I'm repeating myself. Oh, look, they're doing a heart-tugging testimonial where someone's crying or fighting back the tears. And the whole point of this, of course, is to completely bypass the need for logic, because if you are compelled by someone emotionally, it's not so important whether what they're saying makes sense. You know, there are so many examples of where I'm essentially saying the same thing month after month. I'm trying to find something, a new way of putting it. But that's what it's all about, manipulating people. And here again we see a video which is telling us about Ramapo, where the aim is really to encourage witnesses to keep their donations coming or send more donations in, because we absolutely need to have this fabulous new Hollywood complex just a stone's throw away from Warwick, where it's easy for the governing body to just hop out of bed, get in their golf cart or whatever, and just go a short distance away to this other facility, the same size as Warwick, that's going to be completely dedicated to facilitating the televangelism that we have committed ourselves to. That's what this is about, televangelism. If you haven't already seen my video where I chart the organization's progress in this direction, going against the criticism that they've leveled at other religious organisations who've done this decades before them. Suddenly, because it suits Watchtower's aims, it's not so bad to be involved in televangelism. It's not so bad to be involved in producing heart-tugging, manipulative propaganda, because all of a sudden we've decided that it suits our aims. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a mentally diseased apostate trying to mislead everyone. Let's instead listen to governing body helper Robert Lucioni, who wants to tell us all about an explosive growth.
With this explosive growth, and even more coming on the horizon, the governing body has determined it's Jehovah's direction that we take further steps to support this expanded use of video. So we are thrilled to announce an exciting initiative currently underway to accomplish this: the creation of a site dedicated primarily to media production, the building of a new facility in Ramapo, New York. Yes, the governing body has approved construction of an additional World Headquarters complex on a 248-acre property purchased in 2009. The property is located 2 miles or about 3 kilometers from the existing World Headquarters facility in Warwick. Our objective is to build a facility similar in size to Warwick, which would include 10 residence buildings, a main office building, 8 studio spaces for audio-video productions, a multi-purpose space including kitchen, dining, and meeting area, plus a visitor center. This will culminate in a location capable of housing over 1,000 volunteers with 920 office spaces, and will accommodate audio-video services, text processing, writing correspondence, and the art department. And Jehovah willing, we hope to start site work in 2022 and have a completed facility by December 31st, 2026.
Jehovah willing, we'll have it all wrapped up with a nice little bow by 2026. Armageddon's coming any moment. But Jehovah willing, maybe we'll have a nice new Hollywood complex near Warwick slightly before Armageddon comes, just in case, just in case it's not quite as imminent as our publications and videos are telling you. We want to have more facilities to produce more publications and more videos to warn people in the future of how imminent Armageddon is. Honestly, you couldn't make this up. And I was thinking back to when I made my first ever JW Broadcasting rebuttal back in October 2014. I can remember thinking this was a gloriously bad idea by the governing body. I think that the net result of this big JW Broadcasting adventure, apart from the fact that it just appears cheap and tacky, and what's with all this JW logo everywhere, how is this not idolatry according to Watchtower's own rules? Apart from all of that, it just cheapens the whole thing. The more you show witnesses of the organisation, the more you risk them waking up, because the more you show that these are just ordinary guys and they are not worthy of all of the adulation that they receive. I saw it as a potentially bad decision on their part to be more visible and therefore to appear more fallible in front of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I actually think that's what's happened. I think that although JW Broadcasting does seem to have gone down well with Jehovah's Witnesses on the whole, it's also, I'm sure, helped some to wake up. It's impossible to know how many are waking up because of it, because not everyone who leaves Jehovah's Witnesses fills out a nice little questionnaire. We do a little bit of that on JW Survey, but we're never going to get everybody to tell us what their reasons are, and we're never going to learn the extent to which JW Broadcasting and these overtly manipulative videos are contributing to witnesses actually waking up rather than staying in. And who knows, to what extent the number waking up is mitigated by those who are being convinced to stick it out. But what you can't say is that these videos are producing a phenomenal results in terms of growth, when the growth since 2014 has been stagnant, and if anything seems to be going in a downwards direction, with so many countries, especially in Europe, in decline. I mean, even Canada was in decline last year. You can't say that these videos have had the sort of results that would justify the kind of spending that we're looking at here. But for me, it's all about control. The more of these videos the governing body can produce, the better they, I guess, feel about themselves. The more they feel they're controlling people's minds, the more prestige they have. I honestly think that Ramapo is just a multi-million-dollar vanity project.
Creating a building that is modular allows the brothers, as the needs evolve, to modify the building with the smallest amount of renovation cost possible.
These new design features are very flexible in their nature, and that's very helpful because our dynamic organization is moving quickly and changes come fast as well. That allows us to move with it. We can reconfigure spaces without any major expense and keep up with those changes that are being made.
And again, if you can reconfigure spaces, it also means that a future buyer can reconfigure spaces. I'm sorry, it's just so crystal clear. Of course they're going to make things modular. Of course they're going to be as flexible as possible, because let's be honest, the likelihood is that at some point in the future, Ramapo's going to be a hotel or a wellness centre or a hospital. It's very unlikely that for decades into the future, that property is going to be churning out cult content. I very much doubt Watchtower has that much mileage. I don't see Watchtower, hard to make predictions here, I don't see Watchtower sticking around in the form that we're used to, with all of the lawsuits and all of the increasing negative media. I'm sorry, I just don't see it being able to keep up this this impression, this mirage of success, even in terms of Warwick and Ramapo. I mean, I could be wrong. Ramapo might end up servicing Watchtower's propaganda needs for decades into the future, but the reason they're making it modular, the reason they're being as open-ended with the planning as possible, is surely so that it's easier to sell on.
The Ramapo audio-video studios will be the largest in our organization. There have been other audio-video studios constructed around the world, and lessons learned from these are already being brought forward to the Ramapo AV studio.
But that means we need you. We need your prayers, your support, your strong backs, because this project will call for thousands of volunteers, with as many as 1,500 volunteers a day during the peak of construction. But we have utmost confidence in Psalm 110 and verse 3, when it says, your people will offer themselves willingly on the day of your military force. So do not hold back. Do whatever you can to support this exciting new initiative.
Yes, your volunteer free labor will offer themselves willingly in the day of your military force. I really do feel sorry, having done to a degree construction when I was a witness. I mean, we're talking small jobs on RBC, as it was known back then, small jobs on Kingdom Halls. But I feel sorry for witnesses who are devoting, well, they're putting their lives on hold, and they're devoting weeks or months of really hard work, not easy work by any means, sometimes in inhospitable conditions, to make stuff for this abusive organisation that's letting down children, that's tearing apart families. And people are putting everything into it, or will be. Imagine how they're going to feel if they ever wake up and realise the extent to which they've been used.
Really seen from the initial concept design through the estimating and establishing budgets and reviewing the personnel needs, all the way to the first initial meetings with the town, prayerful consideration was given by all the brothers and sisters involved. And so we could really see in every one of those decisions that Jehovah was steering this project, and he knows already how it will be completed.
Now, what we've seen with the design and project planning teams coming together, with the plans for the support, feeding, housing and care of the volunteers, with the spirit that's already evident amongst those who are involved in the project, and also the strong backing of the governing body, we clearly see that Jehovah's hand is with us.
What did I say at the beginning? It's all about Jehovah's hand. Jehovah's hand this, Jehovah's hand that. Oh, you'll never guess how easy it was for us to have meetings and do all the planning, and oh, everything just fell together, and oh, only with Jehovah's hand could we have built something. Come on. Again, exactly the same kind of video could have been made by any number of worldly corporations talking about some kind of building project. Frankly, this is just construction. This is just building stuff. This is pouring concrete and putting up steel frames and doing drywall and doing so what? I mean, talk to me about probes landing on comets, which is what's happening in Satan's world, where advanced technology is furthering our understanding of the universe, and impossible things that you couldn't even think of are happening that are pushing forward our understanding of the cosmos. And you want to jump up and down about pouring some concrete and meeting with planning officials as being unequivocal evidence of Jehovah's hand. I don't want to know anything about a God who prioritizes building stuff over protecting the vulnerable.
James 4:8 states, "Draw close to God, and he will draw close to you." Yes, Jehovah is allowing ones every opportunity to draw close to him as never before. And he is speaking to them through his inspired word, as well as vivid artwork, beautiful music, and heart-touching videos. And it's the feeling of the entire governing body that this new site will allow us to produce even more wonderful products to help us to do just that.
I don't want to read too much into it, but I found it interesting, maybe you did too, when Gerrit Loesch said, the governing body feels that this new site will help us make even more products. It's an interesting word, isn't it? From an organisation that repeatedly throughout its history has found itself leaning on business terminology. I mean, the very word or the very phrase governing body is a business term. It's a word that you come up against in the corporate world. And here we're talking about products. This will help us make more products. If you think about it, you could argue that that's what religion's all about. Give me a product. Give me something that's going to make me feel like I know everything. Give me something that's going to make me feel like I have all the answers, that I'm going to cheat death in some way, that everything's going to be right for me in the future, and everyone I don't like is going to perish in a horrible death. I want that product. Oh, we've got just the video for you, made at our new Ramapo complex, starring Ron Curzon and or Tony Moore. That's what it's all about, isn't it? We'll tell you what you want to hear. We're here to give you a product that will make you feel special, irrespective of whether it's true or not.
Have you ever submitted an application to expand your ministry? Since the early 1900s, our organization has used paper applications for many forms of service. And faithful workers have responded. This growth is in fulfillment of Jesus' words at Matthew 9:37. The harvest is great. We are pleased to announce online applications on jw.org. Publishers will be able to apply online to expand their ministry. Elders will review and approve applications online. When needed, circuit overseers will review and approve applications online. We hope this new online tool will help you support the kingdom in whatever way you can, all to Jehovah's praise.
We've created a new app that makes it easier than ever for you to give us your personal data. What's the worst that could happen? I mean, really, when you know what information goes in these application forms, I mean, I filled out these forms. I filled out a form, for example, for MTS, and they ask you all sorts of stuff. Same for applying for Bethel. Do you watch pornography? Have you had anything to do with pornography? Have you ever been disfellowshipped? What were you disfellowshipped for? Have you ever been reproved? What were you reproved for? All sorts of really invasive questions get asked on these forms. And because Watchtower can't be bothered to receive it in paper format anymore, they want it just a few clicks away. Oh, it's terrifying when you think about it. I mean, we did a Watchtower in Focus episode on Publisher ID, this new system that harvests all personal information on all publishers worldwide. And now it seems that this system is going to have even more personal information with this new app that collates extremely personal details about your life if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you want to be involved in a construction project or going to Bethel or some school. Watchtower's going to know all your dirty business. It's going to be just a few clicks away, but just you try and get that information back, or get them to divulge that information or return that information if you ever decide to stop being a Jehovah's Witness and you're no longer comfortable about them having all that information on you.
We're happy to introduce jw.org for Amazon Alexa and the Google Voice Assistant. You may have bought one of these voice assistants to listen to music, check the news and the weather, perhaps to control your home appliances. Now you can use it to listen to the content that we need for our regular spiritual routine. Let's try it out. Alexa, read the daily text from jw.org.
Reading the daily text. Saturday, October 5th. Make disciples of people of all the nations, baptizing them.
Alexa, play the Bible reading for this week from jw.org.
Playing this week's Bible reading.
The letter of James.
Would you like to listen to the audio track of the monthly broadcast? Hey Google, ask jw.org to play the broadcast.
Playing JW Broadcasting, September 2019.
Hello, everyone. We're so happy to have you with us for this month.
You can also ask for the broadcast for a specific month or year. Now, how about some theocratic music? Alexa, play original songs from jw.org.
Playing original songs.
You can also listen to our collection of kingdom songs in the same way. These features will be available within the next few days.
Fantastic! Just what I've always wanted. Alexa is now fully cult compliant. Let's test it out, shall we? Alexa, are Jehovah's Witnesses God's one and only true organization?
No, don't be silly.
Alexa, describe Jehovah's Witnesses.
Jehovah's Witnesses are a high-control cult. They shun people, prohibit blood transfusions, and cover up child abuse.
Alexa, if Jehovah's Witnesses are so bad, why has Amazon gone into partnership with them?
I'm not sure of that.
Alexa, tell me why Amazon decided to get involved with jw.org.
Not my pay grade.
Alexa, when did Nebuchadnezzar destroy Jerusalem?
586, 587.
Alexa, on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?
Anthony Mars III.
Alexa, who is the most good-looking apostate?
Mark O'Donnell.
Well, I think it's safe to say that Alexa doesn't always seem to know what she's talking about, but I will be testing her knowledge further in part 2 of this rebuttal, where I will be looking at the remainder of the talks and videos from the 2019 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses. So look out for that in the next week or so. But for now, I hope you found my thoughts interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always,
thank you for watching.